Hello, everyone. Welcome to Learn English Podcast.
Learning new English words and remembering them fast can feel like a huge challenge, especially when you are a young learner who is eager to improve your English. But the truth is that the human brain is wired to remember information better when it is interesting, repeated, and connected to real experiences. And this is where podcasts become an incredible tool. Because when you listen to English podcasts every day, your brain starts associating the sounds of words with their meanings, their context, and their pronunciation. And the first step to remembering new words fast is to listen actively, which means not just letting the audio play in the background while you scroll on your phone or do other things, but actually focusing on the words, repeating them, writing them down, and even speaking them aloud. Because active engagement creates stronger neural connections in your brain. And studies have shown that when you hear a word, see it written, and speak it yourself, your memory retention increases dramatically. So the first rule for young learners is to make listening to English podcasts an active and intentional activity rather than a passive one. And to make it more effective, you should choose podcasts that match your level. Because if the vocabulary is too difficult, you will feel frustrated and may give up. But if it is slightly challenging, your brain will stretch and learn new words in a natural way. And one of the secrets to remembering words quickly is repetition, which means that every new word should appear multiple times in different contexts. And podcasts are perfect for this because many English podcasts use storytelling, real conversations, or recurring phrases. So you hear words again and again in ways that are meaningful. And this is far more effective than simply memorizing a list of words because your brain remembers the meaning, the sound, and the situation together, making the words much easier to recall. And another powerful strategy is to create mental images or associations for each new word, because our brains are much better at remembering images than abstract letters. So if you hear the word enormous in a podcast, imagine a giant elephant or a huge building. And every time you hear enormous again, the image pops into your mind, reinforcing the memory. And you can even combine this with funny or exaggerated pictures to make the association stronger. And while mental imagery is very effective, combining it with physical action is even better, because when you write the word down, use it in a sentence, or gesture while saying it, your brain creates multiple pathways for remembering it. And this is why many young learners benefit from keeping a small vocabulary notebook, where they jot down words they hear in podcasts, along with their meanings, example sentences, and even little doodles or symbols that help them remember. And to make this process even faster, you can organize your words into categories, like food, travel, emotions, or school, because our brains naturally store information in organized patterns. And when words are grouped together, it is easier to recall them. So for example, if you are learning words about emotions and the podcast mentions excited, nervous, and joyful, you can write them together in one section of your notebook and practice them as a group. And this method creates a strong memory network that allows you to remember related words more quickly. And another technique that accelerates word retention is spaced repetition, which means reviewing the words at increasing intervals rather than all at once. And apps like Anki or Quizlet are perfect for this because you can input the words you hear from your podcasts and let the app remind you to review them after a day, a few days, a week, and a month. And this method is scientifically proven to dramatically increase long-term memory retention. So if you are serious about remembering words fast, combining podcasts with spaced repetition is one of the most powerful strategies you can use. And it is also very important to use the words immediately in your daily life, because hearing and repeating is not enough if you never apply the word in real sentences. So you can write your own short stories, chat with friends in English, or even record yourself speaking using the new words, because the act of producing the words solidifies the memory even more. And when you combine active listening, mental imagery, writing, spaced repetition, and speaking, you are essentially training your brain in multiple ways, which is exactly how polyglot learners master thousands of words in a short time. And podcasts are the perfect companion for this method because they provide constant exposure, real-life context, natural pronunciation, and a variety of vocabulary. And the more you listen, the more your brain picks up patterns, collocations, and expressions without you having to consciously memorize them. And this is especially useful for young learners because your brain is still highly adaptable, and consistent practice now will give you a massive advantage in the future. And one of the keys to making all of this work is consistency. Because even listening to a 10-minute podcast every day is better than listening to 1 hour only once a week, because small, regular practice creates stronger memory pathways in the brain. And if you make listening to podcasts part of your daily routine, like during breakfast, while walking, or before bed, your vocabulary will expand naturally, and it will feel less like study and more like a fun habit. And to make it even more engaging, you can combine podcasts with other media, like subtitles, transcripts, or related videos, because seeing the words as well as hearing them helps you remember them faster. And you can highlight new words, mark them for review, and even create mini quizzes for yourself. And by turning learning into a game, you increase your motivation and memory retention. And another technique that works extremely well is storytelling. Because when you hear a story in a podcast, your brain creates a narrative that links all the words together. And humans are wired to remember stories better than isolated facts. So if a podcast describes a character going on an adventure, all the descriptive words, action verbs, and emotional vocabulary become easier to remember. And if you retell the story in your own words or summarize it, you reinforce your memory even more. And this is why listening to narrative podcasts is particularly effective for vocabulary building. And as your vocabulary grows, it becomes a positive cycle, because the more words you know, the easier it is to understand new podcasts. And the more you understand, the faster you learn. And soon you realize that remembering new words is no longer difficult. It becomes natural, enjoyable, and even exciting. Because every new word you learn is like unlocking a new door to understanding, communication, and confidence. And this feeling motivates you to keep learning. And the great thing about podcasts is that there is content for every interest. So whether you love science, travel, music, or technology, you can always find podcasts that introduce new vocabulary in a context that excites you. And when learning is connected to your passion, your brain absorbs information much faster. And to take it even further, you can combine podcasts with speaking challenges, like pausing the podcast and trying to use the new word in a sentence, or predicting the next word or sentence before the speaker says it, because this active engagement forces your brain to retrieve the word immediately, which strengthens memory. And by repeating this exercise regularly, your recall speed improves dramatically. And another tip is to review words out loud, because the act of producing the word vocally engages muscle memory and reinforces the neural pathways. And if you record yourself repeating the words or reading transcripts from podcasts, you can listen back and self-correct, which trains both your memory and pronunciation. And the more senses you involve, hearing, speaking, seeing, and writing, the faster you remember. And finally, it is crucial to stay patient and persistent, because while technology like podcasts can accelerate vocabulary learning, real mastery comes from consistent practice, review, and usage. And if you dedicate time every day, actively listen, repeat, write, speak, and use mental images, your ability to remember new English words will increase exponentially. And over time, your vocabulary will grow naturally. Your confidence will soar, and learning English will become a joyful and empowering journey, all made possible by the smart use of podcasts, combined with active engagement, creativity, and persistence. And when young learners like you apply these methods daily, there is no limit to how quickly and effectively you can remember new words and improve your English fluency.
Once you understand the basics of using podcasts to remember English words, the next step is to incorporate advanced memory techniques that make retention even faster and more reliable. Because simply listening is not always enough, and the brain needs multiple pathways to store information permanently. So young learners who are serious about improving their English should consider using mnemonics, which are creative mental shortcuts that link new words to something familiar. For example, if you hear the word gregarious, which means sociable and outgoing, you can imagine a friend named Greg who loves talking to everyone at school. And every time you think of Greg, you automatically remember the meaning of gregarious. And mnemonics are extremely effective because our brains love stories, patterns, and connections. And this is why combining them with podcast is powerful, because you hear the word in context, imagine the story in your mind, and then reinforce it with a mental image, making it nearly impossible to forget. And you can even create exaggerated, funny, or dramatic images, because the brain remembers things that are emotional, humorous, or unusual much more than ordinary, dull examples. And this is exactly what makes young learners excel when they use podcasts creatively, because every new word becomes not just a word, but a memorable experience, a mini story in your mind. And the more vivid the story, the stronger the memory. And once you have a mnemonic in place, the next step is spaced repetition, which works hand in hand with podcasts, because podcasts expose you to natural, repeated usage of words in real contexts. And apps like Anki, Quizlet, or even a simple notebook can help you schedule reviews at increasing intervals. For example, reviewing a word the next day, then 2 days later, then a week later, then a month later. And this method is scientifically proven to transfer words from short-term memory to long-term memory. And the beauty of podcasts is that they provide multiple exposures naturally. So if you hear gregarious again in a podcast episode a week later, your recall is reinforced without you even trying. And this combination of mnemonics, active listening, and spaced repetition makes remembering words incredibly fast and reliable. Another powerful method is active recall, which means testing yourself rather than just passively reviewing. And this is where podcasts shine, because after listening, you can pause and ask yourself, which new words did I hear? What do they mean? Can I use them in a sentence? And by forcing your brain to retrieve the word actively, you strengthen the memory much more than simply reading or hearing it. And for young learners, this can be turned into a fun game, like trying to remember 5 new words from an episode before writing them down, or creating a small challenge with friends or classmates to see who can recall more words accurately. And active recall works even better when combined with multi-sensory engagement, which means writing, speaking, and visualizing the words at the same time. So for example, after hearing gregarious in a podcast, you write it down, say it out loud 3 times, imagine your friend Greg talking to everyone at school, and even type it in a quiz app. And all these actions together create multiple memory pathways, making it much faster to remember. To make this process even more effective, it is important to use new words in real-life situations, because memorization alone is not enough, and young learners should actively try to speak, write, or think in English using the words they learn from podcasts. For example, if you learned gregarious, you can describe your classmate, a family member, or a character in a story as gregarious. And the more you use the word in meaningful ways, the stronger the memory becomes. And this is why podcasts are so effective, because they provide words in natural contexts. And by using them in your own sentences, you bridge the gap between hearing a word and being able to recall and apply it in real life. And another trick is to connect new words to your personal experiences, because the brain loves personal relevance. So if the podcast mentions adventure and you recently went on a trip, think about how the word relates to your trip. And suddenly, adventure is no longer abstract. It is part of your memory of a real event. And this personal connection accelerates retention. And when you combine personal relevance with mnemonics, active recall, and spaced repetition, you create a highly effective learning loop that allows you to remember hundreds of words quickly and naturally, and the process becomes enjoyable rather than a chore. In addition, podcasts allow you to learn words in context, which is much faster than memorizing isolated lists, because when you hear a word used in a sentence, you not only learn its meaning, but also its pronunciation, grammar, collocations, and emotional tone. For example, if the podcast says, "She was feeling ecstatic because she passed the exam," you immediately learn that ecstatic means extremely happy, how it is used in a sentence, and even the emotional intensity of the word. And this is why context is crucial, because the brain remembers words that are part of a story or a situation much more easily than words presented as standalone definitions. And as a young learner, you should make a habit of pausing the podcast and repeating sentences out loud, or even rewriting them in your own words, because by reproducing the context, you reinforce memory pathways. And the more exposure to words in real sentences you get, the faster your vocabulary grows. And over time, you start recognizing patterns, like which adjectives pair with which nouns, which verbs take which prepositions, and which phrases sound natural. And this pattern recognition is another reason why podcasts accelerate vocabulary learning. Because you're not just memorizing words, you're learning the language as it is actually used by native speakers. Another tip is to combine podcasts with visual aids, like transcripts, subtitles, or word maps, because seeing the word as well as hearing it strengthens memory. And many podcasts provide transcripts online, so you can follow along while listening, highlight new words, and make connections between spelling and sound. And this combination of listening and seeing is called dual coding, and it is one of the most effective ways to remember new information. And for young learners, it's fun too, because you can color code words, draw little pictures next to them, or create mind maps linking related words. And when you engage visually, orally, and kinesthetically, you give your brain multiple ways to store and retrieve vocabulary. Podcasts also allow you to learn idioms, phrasal verbs, and expressions which are notoriously difficult to memorize from books, because they often don't make literal sense. But when you hear them in real conversation, you naturally absorb the meaning and usage. For example, break the ice or hit the books become easy to remember after hearing them used in context multiple times. And young learners should actively note these expressions, practice them in sentences, and even act them out, because using multisensory techniques dramatically improves recall. And when combined with spaced repetition and active recall, these tricky words and phrases become part of your natural vocabulary. And this method is much faster and more effective than memorizing lists of idioms with definitions. Furthermore, podcasts provide exposure to different accents, speeds, and styles, which is critical for memory, because the brain must work a little harder to process varied input, and this effort strengthens retention. So if you listen to one podcast with an American accent, another with a British accent, and a third with an Australian accent, you train your brain to recognize the same words under different conditions, making it easier to remember them in real conversations. And this type of exposure also helps you understand native speakers better, which further motivates you to remember words. Because when you understand and use them correctly, you feel confident and accomplished. And motivation is a key factor in memory, especially for young learners. Because the more emotionally invested you are, the more your brain prioritizes the new words for long-term storage. And by choosing podcasts about topics you're passionate about, you naturally increase your attention, enjoyment, and retention. And this is why personalized content is so effective.
Finally, it is important to track your progress and celebrate small wins, because remembering words is a cumulative process, and young learners often get discouraged if they feel they are not making progress. But by keeping a vocabulary journal, checking off new words you remember, testing yourself weekly, and seeing tangible growth, you reinforce positive habits and boost motivation. And this positive reinforcement creates a feedback loop that encourages consistent listening, active practice, and regular review. And when you maintain this cycle over weeks and months, your ability to remember new English words accelerates dramatically. Your vocabulary grows naturally, and you gain confidence, fluency, and mastery, all through the smart, creative, and consistent use of podcasts, active engagement, mnemonics, spaced repetition, visual aids, real-life application, and personal relevance. And when young learners combine these techniques, there is no limit to how quickly they can learn, remember, and use new English words. And the journey becomes exciting, empowering, and fun, because every new word you hear in a podcast is an opportunity to expand your vocabulary, connect with real-life English, and become more confident and fluent. In addition to mnemonics, spaced repetition, active recall, and contextual learning through podcasts, another incredibly effective way to remember new English words fast is to integrate technology and creative exercises into your daily routine, because the more your brain interacts with a word in multiple ways, the faster it becomes embedded in your long-term memory. And for young learners who are motivated to improve their English, this means setting up a structured yet flexible learning system that revolves around podcasts, apps, writing exercises, speaking practice, and playful challenges. For example, you can start your day by listening to a short 10-minute podcast episode while having breakfast, actively noting down any new words, imagining mental images for each, and immediately using them in sentences either out loud or in a small vocabulary journal. And then, throughout the day, you can revisit the same words through spaced repetition apps like Anki or Quizlet, testing yourself repeatedly. And by the time you reach evening, you have already seen, heard, written, and spoken the same words multiple times, which strengthens the memory pathways and ensures that these words stick. And this approach is far superior to passive study because it engages your attention, your imagination, and your active brain processing all at once, which is exactly how young learners can accelerate vocabulary retention. And in addition to this, you can gamify your learning because humans naturally respond to challenges, rewards, and streaks. And by creating personal goals, such as learning 5 new words every day, creating mini quizzes for yourself, or competing with friends to see who remembers the most words from a podcast, you transform learning into a fun and motivating experience. And this engagement significantly enhances memory because your brain releases dopamine, the motivation chemical, which helps reinforce learning. And the combination of podcast listening, active recall, mnemonics, spaced repetition, visualization, and gamification creates a complete system for remembering new English words at an incredibly fast pace, while also keeping the process enjoyable and sustainable. Another essential tip is to use words in multiple contexts, because the human brain remembers concepts better when they are connected to different situations, emotions, and stories. And podcasts are ideal for this because they often present vocabulary in dialogues, stories, interviews, and real-life scenarios, which allows you to hear the word in various contexts, understand subtle nuances, and pick up natural collocations. And then you can reinforce this by using the words yourself in writing, speaking, or even thinking in English, because applying words in different scenarios strengthens your ability to recall them effortlessly. And as a young learner, you can make this even more effective by creating personalized sentences or stories using the new words you encounter in podcasts. For example, after hearing the word meticulous, you can write a short story about a character who is extremely careful with details, or describe your own habits using the word. And by combining creativity with repetition, your brain forms strong, interconnected memory webs for each new word. And the richer these connections, the faster and more reliably you remember. And over time, this approach not only helps you remember words, but also improves your grammar, sentence structure, and overall fluency, because you are actively using the words rather than passively memorizing them. To further accelerate retention, young learners should also combine podcasts with visual and interactive tools, because seeing a word while hearing it reinforces memory through dual coding. And you can use transcripts, subtitles, flashcards, or even draw images for words that are difficult to remember. And this multisensory approach ensures that you are learning the word in multiple ways: hearing it, seeing it, saying it, writing it, and imagining it, which makes recall much faster and easier. And for words that are abstract or challenging, you can create exaggerated mental images or silly associations, because the brain naturally remembers things that are unique, emotional, or humorous. And by linking the meaning of the word to an unforgettable mental picture, you ensure that it will be recalled quickly when needed. And podcasts provide the perfect medium for this because they offer authentic examples of words in natural conversation, making your mental images more accurate and meaningful. And then you can pair these mental images with active review and application to maximize memory retention, while also keeping the learning process enjoyable, engaging, and highly motivating. Another essential tip is to use words in multiple contexts, because the human brain remembers concepts better when they are connected to different situations, emotions, and stories. And podcasts are ideal for this because they often present vocabulary in dialogues, stories, interviews, and real-life scenarios, which allows you to hear the word in various contexts, understand subtle nuances, and pick up natural collocations. And then you can reinforce this by using the words yourself in writing, speaking, or even thinking in English,
because applying words in different scenarios strengthens your ability to recall them effortlessly. And as a young learner, you can make this even more effective by creating personalized sentences or stories using the new words you encounter in podcasts. For example, after hearing the word meticulous, you can write a short story about a character who is extremely careful with details, or describe your own habits using the word. And by combining creativity with repetition, your brain forms strong, interconnected memory webs for each new word. And the richer these connections, the faster and more reliably you remember. And over time, this approach not only helps you remember words, but also improves your grammar, sentence structure, and overall fluency, because you are actively using the words rather than passively memorizing them. To further accelerate retention, young learners should also combine podcasts with visual and interactive tools, because seeing a word while hearing it reinforces memory through dual coding. And you can use transcripts, subtitles, flashcards, or even draw images for words that are difficult to remember. And this multi-sensory approach ensures that you are learning the word in multiple ways, hearing it, seeing it, saying it, writing it, and imagining it, which makes recall much faster and easier. And for words that are abstract or challenging, you can create exaggerated mental images or silly associations, because the brain naturally remembers things that are unusual, emotional, or humorous. And by linking the meaning of the word to an unforgettable mental picture, you ensure that it will be recalled quickly when needed. And podcasts provide the perfect medium for this because they offer authentic examples of words in natural conversation, making your mental images more accurate and meaningful. And then you can pair these mental images with active review and application to maximize memory retention, while also keeping the learning process enjoyable, engaging, and highly motivating. Another critical tip is to practice listening and repeating words out loud, because pronunciation is a critical part of remembering new words, because the way a word sounds affects how easily it is retrieved from memory. And by carefully listening to native speakers, repeating words out loud, and imitating intonation, stress, and connected speech, you not only improve pronunciation, but also reinforce the auditory memory of the word. And this is why shadowing, the practice of repeating the podcast speaker in real time, is highly effective because it forces your brain and mouth to work together, creating a strong memory trace for both the meaning and the sound of each word. And when combined with writing, visualization, and spaced repetition, shadowing turns passive listening into active learning, accelerating vocabulary retention far beyond traditional memorization. And for young learners, this method is both fun and empowering, because you can hear yourself improving, and every word that sticks becomes a small victory that motivates you to continue. Another secret strategy for remembering new English words fast through podcasts is reviewing and recycling vocabulary consistently, because forgetting is natural, and the only way that turns short-term memory into long-term memory is through repeated exposure over time. And this is why young learners should create a vocabulary routine that involves reviewing words multiple times in different contexts, whether by reviewing your notebook, taking online quizzes, revisiting podcast episodes, or trying to use words in daily conversations. And each repetition strengthens the memory and makes the word more accessible for spontaneous recall. And to make this process even more effective, you can group related words together because the brain remembers semantic